The chandeliers of the grand ballroom were less sources of light than they were constellations of judgment. They hung from the vaulted ceiling of City Hall, like gilded spiders, casting a cold, brilliant glow on the 300 souls trapped in their web below. This was the mayor's annual charity gala, the city's premier performance of civic virtue, where influence was the currency, and conversations were chess moves, played with champagne flutes. Smiles, bright and sharp as shattered glass, never reached the eyes. Dr. Kesha Williams moved through the gilded cage with a practiced grace that belied the tension coiling in her gut. Her emerald gown, a column of shimmering silk, was both armor and camouflage. In this room, she was a respected academic, a celebrated criminologist, the soon-to-be-announced appointee to a powerful new civilian oversight committee. In 2 days, on Monday morning, she would be something more, something that would shatter the fragile peace of this room. But for tonight, she played her part. "Dr. Williams." "A pleasure," a portly developer murmured, his handshake lingering a moment too long. "Councilman," she replied, her smile a perfect, polished stone. "So good to see you supporting the Children's Literacy Fund." She knew for a fact his latest luxury condo development had displaced a public library. But this was the game. Her gaze swept the room, cataloging the power players, the union bosses holding court by the bar, the media moguls trading secrets in hushed tones, the old money philanthropists whose names adorned hospital wings and university buildings, and Mayor Patricia Carter, a pragmatic idealist in a sea of sharks, working the room with a politician's relentless energy. It was Carter who had championed Kesha, seeing in her the brilliant, unshakable force needed to drag the city's police department into the 21st century. And now, the mayor's voice boomed from the stage, amplified to an almost intimate warmth. "It is my distinct honor to present the Community Leadership Award to a woman whose work has redefined our understanding of justice and public safety, a true daughter of our city, whose scholarship and advocacy have already made our community a better place. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kesha Williams." A wave of polite, percussive applause rippled through the ballroom. Kesha felt 100 pairs of eyes fix on her as she began the long walk toward the stage. Her heels clicked a steady, deliberate rhythm on the marble floor. This was it. The first step into the public light. The first test. She was halfway to the dais when a figure stepped into her path, blocking her way. He was a bull of a man, squeezed into a security guard's uniform that was a size too small, the fabric straining at his shoulders and thick neck. His face was a ruddy mask of resentment, his eyes small and cold. A slight, almost imperceptible limp favored his right leg, and an old, faded scar puckered the skin over his right knuckles. He wasn't one of the polished, private security professionals the city usually hired for these events. He was a cop, off duty, or perhaps on duty, but out of uniform, working a side gig. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low growl that cut through the polite applause, causing it to falter. "I'm going to need you to come with me." A bubble of silence expanded around them. Conversations died. Heads turned. The mayor, mid-sentence on stage, paused, her smile freezing on her face. Kesha kept her expression neutral, a mask of calm inquiry. "I'm sorry. Officer, is there a problem?" His name tag read B. Thompson, Officer Bradley Thompson. The name resonated in Kesha's mind, a single, discordant note in the symphony of her meticulously laid plans. She knew that name. She knew his file. But he did not know hers. To him, she was just a face in the crowd, a problem. He didn't recognize her by name, but something about her, her poise, her expensive gown, her unapologetic presence in this space ignited a fuse deep within him. It was a visceral, hateful reaction, an ancient rage looking for a target. "There's been a report," he said, his voice rising, ensuring everyone in their immediate vicinity could hear. "Mrs. Davenport's clutch, a vintage Chanel. It's gone missing from her table." He pointed a thick finger at the small, beaded bag in Kesha's hand. "That looks an awful lot like it." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was absurd. Her clutch was a contemporary design, nothing like the described vintage piece. But the truth didn't matter. The accusation itself was the weapon. The sudden, uncomfortable silence that fell over the nearby tables was a sound Kesha knew well. It was the sound of suspicion solidifying, of assumptions being confirmed. She saw it in the flickering eyes, the tightened jaws of the city's elite. The racial undertone wasn't lost on anyone. Kesha's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice, when she spoke, was as cool and clear as ice water. "Officer, my bag is my own. I suggest you check with Mrs. Davenport. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "No. I think I'll check you," Thompson snarled, his authority swelling to fill the space. He reached for her arm. "We can do this quietly over here, or we can make a bigger scene. Your choice." The public humiliation was a physical force, pressing in on her. The whispers, the stares, the barely concealed smirks. It was a shocking, surreal mirror of another time, another place. A moment of profound powerlessness she had sworn she would never experience again. For a fleeting second, she was 17 again, helpless on a rain-slicked street, watching a different kind of uniformed officer destroy her world. The memory was a ghost limb, aching with a pain that never truly faded. But she was not 17 anymore. She was not powerless. She took a small, deliberate step back, pulling her arm from his grasp. She met his gaze, and the mask of calm inquiry fell away, revealing something cold and hard beneath. It was the look of a predator that has just identified its prey. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping, each word precise and weighted, "I suggest you verify your facts before you destroy what's left of your career." The threat was so unexpected, so utterly out of context from the woman in the ball gown, that Thompson actually faltered. He blinked, momentarily confused, before he could recover. Mayor Carter was there, descending from the stage like a hawk, her face a thundercloud of controlled fury. "Officer Thompson, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" the mayor demanded, her voice a low, dangerous whip crack. Just then, a flustered woman with a blue rinse hairdo scurried over. "Oh, goodness. I am so sorry for the commotion. I found it. My clutch. It had simply fallen under the table." She held up a quilted Chanel bag, its gold chain glinting under the chandeliers. The tension broke, but the damage was done. The air was thick with embarrassment and a lingering, ugly stain. Thompson's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He had been made a fool of, publicly, in front of the city's most powerful people. His gaze fixed on Kesha, the object of his humiliation, and the hatred in his eyes intensified, raw and undisguised. He opened his mouth to say something. Another insult, another justification, but the mayor cut him off. "Get out!" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, but carrying the absolute authority of her office. "Your shift is over. Report to the commissioner's office at 8 a.m. Monday morning." Thompson stared at Kesha one last time, a look of pure venom, before turning on his heel and limping away, the sound of his uneven footsteps swallowed by the returning murmur of the crowd. Mayor Carter turned to Kesha, her face etched with apology. "Kesha, I am so sorry." I don't know what to say. That was inexcusable. Kesha straightened her gown, her composure a flawless, impenetrable shield. The incident was a deviation from the plan, an unexpected variable, but it was also an opportunity. It was an activation. The game had just started, and her opponent had made the first fatal mistake. "Don't worry, Patricia," Kesha said, her voice serene as she looked out at the sea of faces, none of whom understood the tectonic plates that had just shifted beneath their feet. "He has no idea what he's just done." She turned her gaze toward the stage, her award forgotten. Her mind was already moving, calculating, recalibrating. But he's about to find out. Kesha's apartment was a sanctuary of controlled order, located in a converted warehouse in the city's arts district. The cavernous space was defined by clean lines, polished concrete floors, and stark white walls. It was less a home than an extension of her mind, minimalist, meticulous, and filled with a quiet, formidable strength. A floor-to-ceiling bookshelf dominated one wall, its contents a curated history of criminology, law, and social justice, art, abstract and challenging, provided the only splashes of color. The environment was a reflection of her nature, a sterile, focused contrast to the suffocating opulence of the gala. She kicked off her heels, the soft thud echoing in the silence. The emerald gown felt like a costume she was desperate to shed. After changing into a simple gray sweatshirt and leggings, she walked to the kitchen island and poured herself a glass of water, her movements economical and precise. Her mind was a whirlwind, replaying the scene at the gala, but her exterior was perfectly still. Her gaze fell upon the single photograph that sat on the corner of her desk. It was a simple, silver frame holding a picture of a young man with a wide, infectious grin and eyes that sparkled with fierce intelligence. His arm was slung around a teenage girl with braces and a shy smile, a younger, softer version of Kesha. Daniel, her brother. The sight of him was a dull, constant ache behind her ribs for 20 years. That ache had been the engine of her life. It had fueled her through sleepless nights at Harvard Law, through grueling years at Quantico, through a 2-decade career climbing the ranks of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Every paper she wrote, every case she solved, every promotion she earned was a stone laid on the long, hard road that had, finally, led her back here, back to this city, back to him. She closed her eyes, and the polished concrete of her apartment dissolved into the grimy, rain-slicked asphalt of a street corner on the industrial west side. The memory was always the same, a perfect, horrifying loop. The air is thick with the smell of wet pavement, tear gas, and fear. The protest, a peaceful demonstration against police brutality, organized by her idealistic 17-year-old brother, has turned violent. Shouts and screams echo off the brick facades of derelict factories. A line of riot police, faceless behind their visors, pushes forward, their batons held ready. Daniel is at the front, his voice hoarse as he pleads for calm through a megaphone. "We are unarmed. We are peaceful." A rookie cop, younger than the others, his face pale and slick with rain and sweat, breaks from the line. He's clumsy, nervous, but his eyes are filled with a desperate need to prove himself. He shoves Daniel, hard. It's not a tactical move. It's a show of dominance, a crude assertion of power. Daniel stumbles backward, off the curb, his arms flailing. At that exact moment, a city bus, its driver blinded by the chaos and the glare of flashing lights, swerves to avoid the surge of the crowd. Daniel disappears under its wheels. A 17-year-old Kesha watches from the sidewalk, paralyzed. A single, ragged scream tears from her throat, a sound of such profound agony that it feels like it's ripping her soul apart. She sees the rookie cop's face, frozen in a mask of shock and terror. He looks at his hands, then at the unfolding tragedy, then back at his superior, a stern-faced commander who gives him a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of the head. An order given without words. The moment of truth passes. The story is already being written. The official report, signed by a rookie officer named Bradley Thompson, claimed her brother was an agitator who had lunged at police and died accidentally after falling into traffic. It was a lie. A clean, simple narrative that scrubbed the truth from the official record. The internal investigation was a sham. The system closed ranks, protecting its own, and Bradley Thompson, the boy who killed her brother, was absolved. He was given a commendation for his bravery during a riot. The public shaming that followed was almost as brutal as the loss itself. Her family was painted as troublemakers, their grief dismissed as a political stunt. The powerlessness of that time had been absolute. She had sworn, standing at her brother's graveside, that she would never be powerless again. So she had built a fortress of credentials around herself, a Harvard PhD, a stellar career in federal law enforcement. She had become an expert in the very systems that had failed her family. She had studied power, dissected it, and learned how to wield it. Her appointment as the new chief of police, a secret she and Mayor Carter had guarded for months, was not just a career achievement. It was the culmination of a 20-year plan. It was the key that would finally unlock the door to justice for Daniel. The incident at the gala was an unforeseen gift. Thompson, a ghost from her past, had walked directly into her present, delivering himself to her on a silver platter. He hadn't recognized her, but she had recognized him. The limp, the scar on his hand from where he'd struck the pavement after shoving her brother, they were seared into her memory. His visceral, irrational hatred was not just random profiling. She understood now it was the panicked lashing out of a buried conscience, triggered by a face that was a living echo of his greatest sin. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. The screen read, Marcus Vance. She answered, her voice regaining its professional tone. "They didn't waste any time coming after you," Marcus said, his voice a familiar, gravelly baritone. He had been her mentor at the FBI, a shrewd, world-weary operator who had taught her how to navigate the treacherous currents of institutional power. Now a high-powered security consultant, he was her most trusted advisor. "He walked right into me, Marcus. It was like he was waiting." He wasn't waiting. He was hunting. Guys like Thompson are always hunting for a target to unload their inadequacies on. "You just happened to be it," Marcus said. "Be careful. Kesha, you're walking into a snake pit. The union will protect him. And they've got powerful friends on the city council. Watch out for Richard Sterling in particular. He presents as a reasonable, old guard statesman, but he's been blocking every meaningful police reform bill for the last decade. He's the union's man." "I know," Kesha said, her eyes drifting back to Daniel's picture. "I'm counting on it." After hanging up, she opened her encrypted laptop and pulled up a file sent to her by Jessica Riley, a tenacious investigative reporter for the city's independent news, Weekly, for years. Riley had been chipping away at the fortress of the police department, exposing corruption one story at a time. The file was a comprehensive, off-the-record dossier on Officer Bradley Thompson and his network of protectors, including the police union president, Frank Donovan, and his political patron, Councilman Richard Sterling. She scrolled through years of complaints against Thompson, a litany of excessive force, racial profiling, and intimidation, all dismissed or buried. It was a portrait of a man who believed he was untouchable. Her plan had always been to dismantle the system that created and protected men like Thompson. But now, it was personal. This wasn't just about reform anymore. This was about a reckoning. Monday morning arrived with the steely gray light of a city bracing for a storm. The Central District Police Department headquarters was a brutalist monument of concrete and glass, a fortress of tradition that seemed designed to intimidate. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, industrial-strength disinfectant, and something deeper, an institutional rot that no amount of bleach could scrub away. Kesha walked through the front doors at precisely 7:55 a.m., wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal gray suit. Her presence sent a ripple of shock through the lobby. Officers and civilian staff stopped mid-conversation, their eyes widening as they recognized the woman from the viral news clips of the gala incident. The whispers followed her like a shadow as she made her way to the chief's office on the top floor. Her first command staff meeting was held at 9:00 a.m. sharp. The dozen captains and deputy chiefs who filed into the conference room were a collection of wary, hardened faces. They were the old guard, men who had run the department their way for decades. They looked at her not as their new leader, but as an invading force. Kesha stood at the head of the long, polished table, her posture radiating an authority that needed no uniform. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and even, yet commanding the room's absolute attention. "As of today, this department is entering a new era of accountability and transparency. We will serve this community, all of it, with integrity, or we will not serve it at all." She laid out her initial reforms with surgical precision: mandatory body cameras for every officer, with strict penalties for deactivation, a revised use of force policy that prioritized de-escalation above all else, and her signature initiative, the immediate formation of a civilian oversight board with full subpoena power to investigate misconduct. A muttering broke out among the captains. This was more radical, more sweeping than any of them had anticipated. Then, Kesha projected an image onto the screen at the front of the room. It was a still frame from the gala's security camera, showing Officer Thompson's hand moving toward her face. "This," she said, her voice dropping, "is a case study in failure. A failure of training, a failure of supervision, and a failure of culture." She picked up a thick file from the table. Officer Bradley Thompson has 12 sustained misconduct complaints in his file from the last 2 years alone. Yet he remained on active duty, with his record sealed by union arbitration and departmental inertia. That ends today. Officer Thompson has been placed on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave, pending a full internal and federal investigation into his conduct. This is the new standard. There will be no more secrets. There will be no more untouchable officers. A palpable shock filled the room. She hadn't just disciplined an officer. She had used him as a declaration of war. She had taken the department's ugliest secret and put it on display. In the back of the room, standing against the wall, was a young, uniformed officer named Sarah Carter, barely a year out of the academy. She had been at the gala, part of the official police security detail. She had watched in horror as Thompson, a veteran officer she was supposed to respect, had humiliated and threatened Dr. Williams. She had seen the raw, irrational hatred in his eyes and had felt a sickening knot of fear and confusion. Everything she had been taught at the academy about professionalism and respect had evaporated in that moment. Now, watching her new chief dismantle the old power structure with such cool, relentless force, she felt something else, a flicker of hope. Terrified, but real. The pushback came faster and harder than even Kesha had anticipated. The police union, led by its pugnacious and politically savvy president, Frank Donovan, declared open war. Donovan was a relic of an older era of policing, a man who believed loyalty to the badge trumped all other virtues. He was a master of the veiled threat, the backroom deal, and the carefully worded press release that painted cops as heroes and reformers as enemies. He requested a meeting, which Kesha granted immediately. They met in her office, the Spartan, modern space, a stark contrast to Donovan's old school, glad-handing persona. He sat opposite her desk, his bulk filling the chair, his smile a thin, predatory curve. "Chief Williams," he began, his tone dripping with false cordiality. "We have some concerns. The men and women of this department feel unsupported. This public crucifixion of a decorated officer like Brad Thompson. It's bad for morale. Officer Thompson is a liability the department can no longer afford." "Frank," Kesha replied, her hands folded calmly on her desk. "And morale is a consequence of leadership, not a justification for misconduct." Donovan's smile tightened. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "This department has a certain culture. Dr. Williams, it's been built over generations. It can be difficult for outsiders to appreciate our way of doing things. We look after our own. We wouldn't want you to feel unwelcome." The words were polite, but the message was a clear threat. Kesha leaned back in her chair, a serene, almost amused smile touching her lips. She met his gaze without flinching. "Culture is not a defense for illegality, Frank. And I find I'm an exceptionally fast learner." The battle lines were drawn. The next day, the media smear campaign began. Anonymous sources from within the department leaked stories to sympathetic journalists, painting Kesha as a radical, anti-cop ideologue on a personal vendetta. Thompson was portrayed as a dedicated veteran, a victim of a political witch hunt. The narrative was designed to erode her authority and turn public opinion against her before her reforms could take root. Kesha knew this was Donovan's work, likely aided by his political allies. She refused to engage in the mudslinging. Instead, she focused on her strategy. She fought back not with press conferences, but with action. She held community town halls in the city's most underserved neighborhoods, listening to stories of police abuse that had been ignored for years. She promoted promising young officers like Sarah Carter to a new internal task force, bypassing the entrenched old guard, and she reached out to Jessica Riley. "I need you to dig deeper." "Jessica," Kesha said over an encrypted line, "Thompson is the symptom, not the disease. I want to know who enabled him, who buried the complaints. I want the entire network, from the Union Hall to City Hall." This was no longer just about one bad cop. It was about dismantling the entire corrupt ecosystem that had allowed a man like Bradley Thompson to flourish for years, and to ultimately kill her brother with impunity. The first obstacle had presented itself, and Kesha met it not by going around, but by preparing to tear it down to its foundations. The hunt began in the dusty, forgotten archives of the police department and the digital back alleys of City Hall. While Frank Donovan and his allies waged their war in the press, Kesha, with Jessica Riley as her surgical instrument and Marcus Vance as her strategic advisor, began a quiet, relentless counteroffensive. Jessica Riley operated like a ghost, her inquiries leaving no fingerprints. She spent weeks buried in courthouse basements, poring over old case files and arbitration records. She discovered a pattern every time a serious complaint against Thompson was on the verge of sticking. A key piece of evidence would vanish, or a witness would suddenly recant their testimony, and every time, the union lawyer who negotiated the dismissal was the same. A man with deep ties to Councilman Richard Sterling's Political Action Committee. Simultaneously, Kesha cultivated a source within the fortress. She saw in Officer Sarah Carter Not just an idealistic rookie, but a woman with a core of steel. She called Carter into her office, closing the door and speaking not as a chief to a subordinate, but as one professional to another. "I know what you saw at the gala, Officer Carter," Kesha said gently, "and I know the pressure you're under to stay silent. I am not ordering you to do anything, but if you want to be part of a department that stands for real justice, I need your help." It was a monumental risk for Carter. Betraying the blue wall of silence could end her career, or worse. But she thought of the look on Thompson's face at the gala, and the years of stories she'd heard about his brand of street justice. She made her choice. Carter became Kesha's eyes and ears. She provided inside information about the informal culture of the department, the one Donovan had boasted about. She described Thompson's unofficial training sessions in the precinct gym, where he'd demonstrate what he called attitude adjustments, open-handed compliance slaps, and other off-the-books pain compliance techniques designed to humiliate, not subdue. He used to brag about an old protest he worked as a rookie. Carter recalled one day. The piece of information offered almost as an afterthought. Said it's where he learned that some people only understand force. He got hurt that day, limps when he's tired, has a nasty scar on his hand. The words struck Kesha like a physical blow. A protest, a rookie, a limp. The pieces of her past began to slot into the puzzle of her present. That night, Kesha did something she hadn't done in 20 years. She drove to the city records annex and used her new authority as chief to requisition the complete, unredacted case file for the death of Daniel Williams. Sitting in her silent apartment, under the watchful gaze of her brother's smiling photograph, she spread the brittle, yellowed pages across her dining table. There, it was the official report, flimsy and thin, a pathetic monument to a lifetime of lies. And, at the bottom of the page, a signature in a young, slightly shaky hand, Officer Bradley Thompson. Badge, 714. The details were exactly as she remembered them, vague, contradictory, and exculpatory. But now, with 2 decades of investigative experience, she saw the holes, the inconsistencies, the telltale signs of a narrative constructed to conceal, not to reveal. Her recurring nightmare, the one that had haunted her for years, returned that night with a terrifying new clarity. She was 17 again, on that wet street. But this time, when the rookie cop turned after shoving her brother, his face was no longer in shadow. It was Bradley Thompson's face, pale and twisted with a young man's panic and fear. The professional and the personal had collapsed into a single, white-hot point of focus. This was no longer just about reforming a broken department. It was no longer just about exposing a corrupt network. It was about the man who had taken her brother's life and walked away, protected by the very system she now commanded. The rising action of her life had reached its crescendo, and the truth, in all its horror, was finally in view. Jessica Riley's breakthrough came from a source she'd cultivated for years, a retired clerk from the district attorney's office, a woman who had seen too many secrets buried and wanted to clear her conscience before it was too late. The clerk told Jessica about a witness statement from the protest that had been intentionally misfiled and never entered into evidence. A statement from a street vendor who had seen the whole thing. It took Jessica a week to track him down. He was an old man now, running a hot dog stand in a different part of the city, his life defined by the fear that had kept him silent for 2 decades. But in the face of Jessica's quiet persistence and the knowledge that the new police chief herself was seeking the truth, he finally agreed to talk. He gave a sworn, videotaped deposition. The cop, the young one, he shoved the kid on purpose, the vendor said, his voice trembling with the memory. The kid with the megaphone. He shoved him right off the curb. He looked right at the bus. It wasn't an accident. And then, the commander came over, put a hand on the rookie's shoulder, and just led him away. They never even talked to me. When Kesha watched the video, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening finality. She finally understood the unhinged rage in Thompson's eyes at the gala. It wasn't just the generalized bigotry of a racist cop. It was the specific, panicked terror of a guilty man confronted by a ghost. He didn't know who she was, not consciously, but her face, so much like Daniel's, had been a key, unlocking a dark, buried room in his soul. His attack on her was an attack on his own memory, a desperate, reflexive attempt to brutalize the past back into silence. The revelation transformed her. The cool, detached strategist gave way to something far more dangerous, a woman whose grief had been honed into a razor's edge. Her mission, once a professional imperative, was now a sacred vow. This was for Daniel. This was for the 17-year-old girl who had been forced to stand by and watch her world burn down. Her revenge would not be swift or hot-blooded. It would be cold, meticulous, and absolute. She would not just destroy Bradley Thompson. She would annihilate the entire corrupt architecture that had been built to protect him, to hide his sin, and to erase her brother's name from history. The midpoint had been reached. Her purpose was no longer reform. It was retribution. News that Kesha was reopening a 20-year-old cold case involving a death at a protest sent shockwaves through the city's political establishment. It was a clear signal that her investigation was expanding far beyond the actions of a single officer. Frank Donovan and Councilman Richard Sterling recognized the threat immediately. They saw the threads of their carefully woven network of influence beginning to unravel. They decided to set a trap, with Thompson as the bait. Working through their contacts in the DA's office, they leaked a carefully altered internal memo to the press. The falsified document made it appear as though Kesha was using departmental resources, including the newly formed task force led by Sarah Carter, to pursue a personal vendetta against Thompson. Motivated by the gala incident, the story exploded. Headlines screamed, "Vendetta or Justice Chief Williams accused of abusing power." It was a brilliant political power play. It shifted the narrative from Thompson's history of abuse to Kesha's alleged overreach. It painted her not as a reformer, but as an unstable leader driven by emotion. The trap was sprung. The pressure on Mayor Carter was immense. Her phone rang off the hook with calls from concerned city council members and influential business leaders, all echoing the union's narrative. She summoned Kesha to her office for an emergency meeting. The mayor's usually warm and supportive demeanor was gone, replaced by a strained, anxious tension. "Kesha, what is this?" she asked, gesturing to the newspaper on her desk. "They're accusing you of a witch hunt. My allies on the council are getting nervous. The union is threatening a blue flu, a mass sick-out that would paralyze the city. You need to back off this old case. Focus on the reforms we agreed on. This could destroy everything we're trying to build." Kesha listened, her expression unreadable. She felt a profound sense of isolation. Even her most powerful ally was wavering, more concerned with political fallout than with the foundational crime she was uncovering. "What they're trying to build is a lie." "Patricia," Kesha said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "It's built on a foundation of corruption and murder. Backing off now means letting them win. It means my brother's death means nothing." "Your brother?" the mayor asked, her eyes widening in confusion. Kesha realized her mistake. In her focus, she had held the most crucial piece of the story too close. But it was too late to explain now. Too late to ask for trust she might not receive. She saw in the mayor's eyes the calculus of a politician weighing a friend against a city on the brink of chaos. I can't stop. Patricia, Kesha said, standing up. Not now. She walked out of the mayor's office knowing she was truly alone. Her enemies had successfully isolated her, cornering her. They expected her to retreat, to issue a statement, to engage in a political battle she couldn't win. They had misjudged her completely. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. That afternoon, Kesha Williams formally requested a special, televised public hearing before the Civilian Oversight Board, the very body she had created. The subject of the hearing, a pattern of corruption and cover-up within the Central District Police Department. She was no longer playing defense. She was setting the stage for the final act. The City Council chamber was repurposed for the hearing. Its ornate, wood-paneled walls and tiered seating, lending the proceedings the gravity of a high-stakes trial. Every seat was filled. At the front, the 5 members of the Civilian Oversight Board sat at a raised dais, their faces grim and expectant. In the gallery, a tense mix of media, city officials, police union members in matching blue jackets, and curious citizens buzzed with anticipation. This was the biggest political theater the city had seen in decades, and it was being broadcast live on every local news channel. Councilman Richard Sterling sat in the front row, a portrait of elder statesman calm, there to show support for our brave officers. Beside him, Frank Donovan looked smug, confident that their trap had forced Kesha into a desperate, public gambit she was destined to lose. Their star witness, Bradley Thompson, took the stand, clean-shaven and wearing a crisp suit. He had been coached to appear as the perfect victim, a dedicated public servant railroaded by a vindictive, power-mad chief. He spoke in a steady, earnest voice about his long career, his love for the city, and the unfortunate misunderstanding at the gala. He painted Kesha as an aggressor, himself as a professional just trying to do his job. He was convincing. Then, Kesha was called to the table, not as chief, but as a special consultant to the board. She walked to the podium with a calm, deliberate poise that silenced the room. She carried a single, thick, leather-bound dossier. She did not begin with the gala. She began 20 years in the past. "This is not a story about a stolen clutch," she said, her voice clear and amplified by the microphone. "It is a story about a stolen life." She projected a photograph onto the large screens flanking the dais. It was the picture from her desk, a smiling young man with his arm around his teenage sister. "This was my brother, Daniel Williams," she announced. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Sterling and Donovan exchanged a confused glance. Thompson stiffened in his chair. 20 years ago, Daniel was killed during a protest. The official report, signed by then-rookie officer Bradley Thompson, called it an accident. One by one, Kesha presented her evidence, her voice a steady, dispassionate metronome of damnation. She played the newly discovered witness's videotaped testimony. She called a tearful, but resolute, Sarah Carter to the stand, who testified under oath about Thompson's attitude adjustments and his bragging about the protest where he'd learned to use force. With each piece of evidence, Thompson's carefully constructed facade began to crack. His face grew pale, a sheen of sweat forming on his brow. Kesha then systematically connected Thompson's actions that day to a larger pattern, using Jessica Riley's research to expose the network that had protected him for 2 decades. She showed how Frank Donovan's union had repeatedly intervened to bury complaints, and how Councilman Sterling's political machine had benefited from union support in exchange for blocking police reform. "Officer Thompson," she said, turning to face him directly, "was not just a rogue cop. He was a product of a system that rewards brutality, that silences truth, and that protects murderers if they wear the right uniform." Thompson finally broke. "She's lying," he shouted, rising from his chair. He was an agitator. He lunged at me. I was defending myself. "Is that what your commander told you to say?" Kesha asked, her voice dangerously soft. She turned back to the board. "There is one final piece of evidence." She played an audio file. The sound of crackling static filled the room. Then a voice. Young and panicked, a 20-year-old Bradley Thompson. "Control. This is 714. We have an aggressive subject. The leader. What are my orders?" Then another voice, clipped, authoritative, and chillingly familiar. "Handle the agitator. 714. Use any means necessary. Make the problem go away." A forensic audio expert took the stand and confirmed the identity of the second voice. It was from the dispatch recordings of the protest. A voice belonging to the on-scene police commander that day, a young, ambitious captain named Richard Sterling. A collective gasp swept through the chamber. Every camera swiveled to the front row, where Councilman Sterling sat, frozen, his face a bloodless mask of horror. Frank Donovan stared at him, his expression one of utter betrayal. Thompson collapsed back into his chair, a broken man, finally understanding that he had been a pawn, a disposable tool, for his entire career. Kesha looked from Thompson's shattered form to Sterling's crumbling empire. She had a choice. She could focus solely on Thompson, the man whose hands had taken her brother, or she could bring the whole corrupt temple crashing down. She looked at the faces of the board, at the cameras broadcasting her decision to the entire city. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the voice of a police chief or a grieving sister. It was the voice of pure, unassailable justice. "The rot in this city's institutions goes deeper than one rogue officer," she declared, her gaze locking with Sterling's. "It goes to the very people who claim to lead us." She placed the unredacted dossier on the table in front of the board. "I submit this evidence in its entirety, and I demand a full, independent federal investigation." The climax was not an explosion, but a complete, systematic demolition. She hadn't just won. She had annihilated them all. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The hearing room erupted as reporters surged toward the dais, shouting questions. Councilman Sterling, a ghost in a bespoke suit, was swarmed as he attempted a clumsy retreat, his long-practiced composure utterly shattered. Frank Donovan sat stunned in his seat. A king, suddenly without a kingdom. As federal marshals, not city cops, escorted a catatonic Bradley Thompson from the room. Kesha stood silently at the podium, a calm eye in the center of the hurricane she had unleashed. The following days unfolded in a cascade of consequences, each one a tremor from the earthquake of the hearing. Newspaper headlines, bold and unforgiving, told the story: Councilman Sterling implicated in decades-old cover-up. Police union in crisis as corruption probe launched. Chief Williams vindicated. A sister's 20-year quest for justice. Richard Sterling resigned in disgrace, hours before a federal indictment was unsealed. His political career, built on secrets and lies, was over. Frank Donovan, abandoned by his membership and facing his own investigations, was soundly voted out as union president. The old guard was broken. Mayor Carter, her face a mixture of shock, remorse, and awe, held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. She gave Kesha her unequivocal support, publicly apologizing for having doubted her and promising the city's full cooperation with the federal investigation that would now scour the department's history. Chief Williams did not just expose a crime. The mayor declared she exposed a sickness, and now, under her leadership, we will begin the cure. Amid the storm, Kesha sought out moments of quiet resolution. She met with Sarah Carter, whose brave testimony had been a crucial pillar in her case. Carter was no longer a timid rookie. She was a detective now, a symbol of the department's future. "You did the right thing, detective," Kesha told her. The formal title, a mark of deep respect. In the end, that's the only thing that matters. Finally, when the initial whirlwind had passed, Kesha drove to a small, quiet cemetery on the city's edge. For the first time in 20 years, she visited her brother's grave. The simple granite headstone read, "Daniel Williams, a beloved son and brother." She knelt and traced the letters of his name, the cold stone warming beneath her fingertips, the ache behind her ribs, the one that had been her constant companion for 2 decades, began to subside, replaced by a profound, peaceful stillness. She placed a single white rose on the grave. "It's over. Danny," she whispered to the quiet air. "They know your name now. Everyone knows your name." The falling action of her long war was complete. The ghosts of the past had been faced. The guilty had been punished. And a deep, personal wound had finally begun to heal. 1 year later, the city felt different. It breathed easier. The police department, under the continued, unflinching leadership of Chief Williams, was in the midst of a painful but necessary transformation. Community trust, once a forgotten concept, was slowly being rebuilt. One positive interaction, one fair investigation at a time. The Williams Protocol, as it was now called, was being studied as a national model for police reform. Kesha stood on a street corner on the industrial west side. A year ago, this corner had been a place of urban blight and sorrowful memory, the asphalt still holding the ghost of her brother's final moments. Now, a new building gleamed in the afternoon sun. It was a handsome brick and glass structure, modern and inviting, alive with the sounds of children's laughter and the murmur of conversation. A polished bronze sign by the entrance read, "The Daniel Williams Youth Justice Center." It was a community hub, offering free legal aid for juveniles, mentorship programs pairing at-risk youth with young professionals, and after-school classes in art, music, and civics. It was a place built not just to commemorate a life, but to continue its mission. The dedication ceremony was a reflection of the new city. The crowd was a vibrant mosaic of every neighborhood, every demographic. Mayor Carter was there, as was Detective Carter, along with community activists who had once been the department's fiercest critics. When Kesha approached the podium, she was not wearing her chief's uniform. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress. Today, she was not an instrument of the law or an avenger of the past. She was a builder of the future. She looked out at the crowd, her gaze lingering on a group of teenagers from the center's first mentorship program. Her voice, when she spoke, was filled with a quiet, hard-won peace. "We are not here today to dwell on a tragedy," she began. "We are here to celebrate a legacy. My brother, Daniel, believed in the power of a community to demand justice, to create change, and to lift up its own. He believed that every young person, regardless of their zip code, deserves a chance to build a life of purpose and dignity." She paused, a genuine, serene smile touching her lips. "This building is not a memorial to how he died. It is a monument to how he lived, and to the ideals he fought for. His work did not end on this street corner 20 years ago. It begins anew, every day, within these walls." As the applause washed over her, Kesha felt the last vestiges of her 20-year burden fall away. She was no longer defined by her grief, nor by her quest for revenge. She had taken the deepest pain of her life and transformed it into a legacy of hope and healing for the community her brother had loved. She was not just a survivor. She was a founder, The final, meaningful resolution was not in the destruction of the old, but in the creation of the new.